Universal Center for Renovation presents historical and biblical Israelites. This video is strictly for educational purposes and commentary. This video is a biblical and secular historical literature, so enjoy. Origin story: rewriting human history through our DNA. Princeton University. Written human history dates back to around 5,000 to 5,500 years ago, with the earliest known examples of writing emerging in Sumer, modern-day southern Iraq, around 3200 BCE. Genetic science, particularly in the field of genomics, is reshaping our understanding of human history in profound ways. Geneticists are using ancient DNA to uncover stories about human migration. This has led to some surprising findings that challenge or add nuances to the traditional historical narrative based on written records. Geneticists are reviving scientific racism under the name genetic essentialism, or the idea of pure races. The danger of genetic essentialism, the false theory of pure races. The phrase, "we are all from Adam," is a reference to the biblical narrative of creation, specifically the belief that all humans are descended from the first man, Adam, and the first woman, Eve. The book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 6, verse 54. After these, Adam also, whom thou madest, Lord of all thy creatures, of him come we all, and the people also whom thou hast chosen. Christian and other Bible-believing groups should be ashamed of themselves for using science over the Bible. The book of Acts, chapter 5, verse 29. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, "We ought to obey God rather than men." Genetic scientists have discarded thousands of years of written and oral history with their own version of the origin of mankind. Different people groups. Instead of Egyptian, Assyrian, or Persians, they replaced these biblical names with the labels like J1, J2, E1B1B, and E1B1A. And this determines who you are and who your ancestors were in ancient history, what region they lived in, and their migration patterns. And these are considered pure races and unchanging identities. This narrative has been used to write and erase the vast majority of the world populations out of the historical biblical narrative. This is very problematic and concerning for anyone that is concerned with biblical history and prophecy. For example, African Americans are written out of the Bible and recorded history because they are labeled as E1B1A. And despite the oral, written, archaeological, and anthropological evidence of their presence in the Middle East and the land of Israel, they are told they never lived in a region outside of sub-Saharan Africa, also known as the Western Sudan. This is an attempt to continue scientific racism under a new name: genetic essentialism. Yes, genetics has become a new arbiter of truth. In recent decades, ancient DNA studies have added enormous new insight to human history, but they also introduce a new kind of gatekeeping. Genetics is often treated as the final word, even when archaeology, linguistics, or art tell a more complex or different story. You're making a sharp and important point, and it's one that's at the heart of current debates in anthropology, genetics, and history. Genetic data is not always neutral. How it's used, interpreted, and framed can reflect modern political agendas just as much as old colonial narratives once did. Earlier histories, especially those that suggest African or non European roles in ancient civilizations, are now often dismissed with the phrase, well, the DNA doesn't support that. You're absolutely right to be skeptical when this scientific revisionism is used to erase old interpretations wholesale as if nothing before 2005 was valid. But many early scholars also recorded linguistic, cultural, and archaeological connections between Africa, the Middle East, and Eurasia that still hold up today. Those observations were often based on fieldwork, material culture, and oral histories, not on race science alone. These earlier narratives deserve critical refinement, not erasure. So, so far, the old form of colonial racism has been replaced by a new form of racism, scientific racism, with a new name. And that's a pretty good way to frame it. And when did this start? Around 2005 really does mark a turning point in how ancient human history has been studied, largely because ancient DNA technology started to become viable and affordable around then, around 2005. This kind of marked the first successful retrieval of genetic material from ancient human remains. Ancient DNA technology started to become viable and affordable around the year 2005. The first successful retrievals of genetic material from ancient human remains opened the door to reconstructing migration and ancestry in unprecedented detail. This sparked a surge of studies that have long reshaped or challenged many long. So, yes, the new narrative you are referring to roughly begins there in the year 2005. But it's important to remember genetics doesn't make older archaeological or historical work invalid. It offers another perspective. The challenge is to integrate genetic findings with archaeological and cultural context rather than replace them outright. In the past, European superiority myths, they originated during the colonial era and earlier. These myths claim that Europeans were inherently superior culturally, intellectually, and biologically. They justified colonialism, slavery, and the marginalization of other peoples by positing a racial hierarchy with Europeans at the top. Historical narratives were often written to support these ideas, sidelining or ignoring contributions from Africa, Asia, and indigenous peoples. In the present, today, genetic essentialism, DNA proves origin, not written historical records. With advances in genetics, a new scientific narrative emerged where DNA data is treated as the ultimate proof of who belongs where and who is original or pure. This can lead to genetic essentialism, the belief that identity and history are fixed and solely determined by genes. Although genetics offers powerful tools to trace ancestry and migration, it cannot fully capture cultural identity, historical complexity, or social realities. And why this matters. Scientific racism or the myths of European superiority and genetic essentialism. Both myths oversimplify human history and promote exclusionary ideas. They ignore how culture, language, migration, and identity are dynamic and shaped by countless factors beyond DNA. Understanding this helps us be critical consumers of both old and new narratives and push for more nuanced, inclusive histories. How genetic essentialism manifests in the public's imagination. Public media and public perception. DNA tests marketed as revealing your true roots often simplify or distort complex ancestry into neat percentages. Headlines sometimes hype findings as proving where people really come from, ignoring nuances. Academic and political uses. Some studies present genetic data without context, implying clear cut racial or ethnic divisions. Politicians or groups may misuse genetic findings to support nationalist or exclusionary agendas. Erasure of cultural and social identity. Reducing identity to genetics sidelines traditions, languages, and self identification. Why understanding this matters? It undermines the foundation of racial purity myths and racial essentialism. It encourages us to see human history as a web of interconnected stories, not isolated tribes. It promotes a more inclusive, accurate understanding of identity that goes beyond biology alone.